More than 10,000 people have lost their lives since war broke out in eastern Ukraine back in 2014. Millions have been forced to leave their homes. As the shooting continues, political attempts to end the conflict remain stuck in no man's land. But the fact the fighting didn't spread further and that Ukraine's army was able to regroup is central to President Petro Poroshenko's campaign. His message to voters is clear. Only he can keep Ukraine safe and stand up to Russia. But 5 years of war have also left their mark on Ukrainians' pockets. In Europe's second poorest nation, real incomes are still lower than they were before the war, as household bills have skyrocketed. Over 3 million Ukrainians have left the country in search of work. It's these people, pensioners and those on low incomes struggling to get by, that ex-Prime Minister Yuliya Tymoshenko is trying to reach. She promises to cut household bills in half as soon as she's elected, and do more to ensure Ukrainians can find work at home. Both President Poroshenko and ex-Prime Minister Tymoshenko have been around for decades, and many Ukrainians, especially younger voters, are hungry for change. One person who seems to fit the bill is actor and comedian Volodymyr Zelensky. The 41-year-old may have no previous political experience, but he has played the president before, in the hit series Servant of the People. The sitcom tells the story of a schoolteacher whose rant about the state of the country is caught on video by one of his pupils. The video goes viral, and the teacher suddenly finds himself catapulted to the top job.
Good morning, Mr. President.
Mixing footage from the sitcom with his campaign ads, Zelensky is now trying to convince Ukrainians that he's the outsider the country needs to shake up its corrupt politics. His motto, become president, but stay an ordinary guy. His critics argued that in reality he's no outsider, launching a campaign calling him a puppet of the oligarch Ihor Kolomoisky, a sworn enemy of President Petro Poroshenko. It's Kolomoisky who put Zelensky on television in the first place, and on whose channel he announced his surprise run for the presidency. Zelensky denies there's anything untoward about his relations with the businessman. For now, the polls put Zelensky in first place, far ahead of his rivals. But questions remain. Come election day, will Ukrainians really take the jump and vote for someone whose only experience of politics so far has been with a TV script in his hands?
Well, DW's Nick Connolly filed that report, and he joins us now for more from Kiev. Hello to you, Nick. So the frontrunner currently is a comedian, but what makes Ukrainians think that he can actually do the job as leader of their country?
Good morning. Well, qualified or not, I think this is mainly about protest sentiment, about a kind of collective weariness with the political class here in Ukraine that's been really in charge of this country for the past 20, 30 years. It's important to remember that when the Soviet Union fell apart in the early 90s, Poland and Ukraine, for instance, were as rich, as wealthy per person as each other. Now there's over 1.5 million Ukrainians working in Poland. So Ukraine really has fallen back economically. In terms of corruption, Transparency International puts Ukraine somewhere between Mali and Djibouti in terms of perceptions of corruption, way down there. The only other European country that does as badly is Russia. So there is really a weariness and an anger that things haven't changed faster, that people's lives haven't got better. Obviously, there are still questions whether people will really take that risk, whether they'll take the jump to vote for someone who doesn't have any political experience. And there are also questions about Zelensky's commitment to politics. He's been a bit elusive about whether he's willing to slog it out in politics, even if he doesn't win the presidency this time, if he's willing, say, to go into parliament as an MP. He's not being clear about that, and maybe he'll choose, if he doesn't win, to go back to show business.
Well, Nick, in the previous election, the incumbent President Poroshenko won by a wide margin. Now he's facing an uphill battle. Why has his popularity slipped so far?
I think last time around it was a bit of an unusual situation. The election in 2014 came just after Russia had annexed the Crimea. The war in the east had just got going. So people were really desperate for a safe pair of hands that Poroshenko, that was what he was basically selling the voters, and they gave him an absolute majority in the first round. This time around, people are frustrated that their incomes, their real incomes, are still lower than they were before the war. The conflict in the east hasn't been resolved, although that's not all in his hands. Lots of that obviously depends on Moscow. But I think the sort of overarching theme is frustration that things haven't changed as fast and as irrevocably as they should have. Corruption is a big issue, and there has still been no major public conviction for corruption. No big figure has had to go to prison or lost their wealth, and that is something a lot of people are very unhappy about.
Well, Poroshenko does seem to be campaigning on the issues of security, on standing up to Russia. But how important is this conflict, this ongoing conflict in eastern Ukraine, playing in this election? How important is it?
Well, obviously, the war in Donbass continues. People are still dying there, and there are over 1 million refugees within Ukraine that have left their homes there. So that is very prominent in people's minds. Having said that, there's very little in the way of concrete steps being proposed. Poroshenko is selling himself as the commander-in-chief, the person who can stand up to Russia. But there's very little in the way of new suggestions or solutions to this conflict from the other candidates. So it's there, but it's not being discussed in any great detail.
All right, Nick Connolly reporting from Kiev. Many thanks indeed.